All right, let's look at the bears. We're still in the order Carnivora, family Ursidae. And I want to ask you before we get going here, how many species of bears are there in North America? So not just New York State, but all of North America, how many species of bears? I often get a wrong number for this. Sometimes people tell me two because they forget about polar bears. And sometimes people say four or five because they've heard of bears like brown bear, grizzly bear, Kodiak bear. The truth is we have three species. Polar bears, and this is it. This is your one picture of polar bear. We're not going to cover them again. And then grizzly, brown, and Kodiak are all the same species. And then black bear. So those are the three. We're going to start with black bear because that's the only species of bear in New York State and the only species of bear that's ever been in New York State, unless you go back to the Ice Age. And I want to show you my two favorite photos of black bears in the wild. So this is one of them. I love this picture. This was in Yellowstone National Park, and I just caught this bear. He looks like he's so wild, doesn't he? And just the eye there through the grass. I just really like that. And then I like this one because I think this is the largest bear I've ever photographed. I just took this picture in June of 2019. My wife and I traveled to a wildlife refuge in North Carolina, did a 4-day weekend there specifically to look for black bears and river otters. And man, did we have some great black bear experience. We were there just at the time of the breeding season, so we had a lot of activity there. Look how gigantic this bear's head is. This is a big male, or boar as they call them, and he was not headed straight towards us, although it certainly looks like that in this picture. Okay, let me give you three ways to tell a black bear from a grizzly bear. And guess what one of them is not going to be? Absolutely, it is not going to be color. There are black bears that are brown. There are brown bears that are black. We just never should think about naming mammals after colors. So there's two of the characteristics are visible here. The first one is if you started at the forehead of a black bear and worked your way down to the nose, it's a very gentle slope. So if you think about it as a ski slope, this would be a bunny hill. So start at the forehead and go to the nose. There's no steep forehead, I guess is a good way to think of it. A second characteristic is that black bears have short claws. So this guy right here, if this was a grizzly bear, you would see the claws extending well beyond the fur. The third characteristic isn't really visible in this picture, and I will get to it. But I do want to point out that sometimes I'll have students that'll tell me, well, of course the claws are bigger on a grizzly bear because grizzly bears are bigger. So I want to debunk that. This is a picture. Oh, Danica was about 6, I think, in this photo. We were in the Canadian Rockies, and at this nature center, they had a cool display. The big claws are from a 400-pound grizzly bear, and the small claws are from a 400-pound black bear. So it really isn't about who's bigger, it's really about difference in proportion. And this goes along with their adaptations because the grizzly bear is a good digger. He uses those big claws like the mole did for digging. And the black bear is a good climber. And he uses those shorter claws for being able to dig into the bark and get himself up a tree. Nice. So this is a picture in captivity. I don't know if you can see my feet at the bottom of the picture there. I've always wanted to get a picture of me with a bear at the bottom of the tree. I actually was hoping he was going to climb the tree here. This is Dan. He was hand raised at that place up in Canada where we would go and see captive animals. And to even get him to even look at me, I had to throw a donut at him. So he really just had no interest. We poured honey down the tree here. I don't know if you can see the streaks, and he just had no interest in trying to get at me. But I thought that would be a cool looking picture. We've got short claws on the front and short claws on the back, both for black bears. And when they do climb trees, they often leave scratches behind. Okay, here is the third characteristic. So let's just go through that first one. Here, if you started here between her ears, this is in captivity again, this is Danielle, and you started here between the ears and worked down to the nose, you see it's a very gentle slope. There's no steep forehead present here. The claws are not visible in this picture, but what you can see on the back is no hump. So black bears do not have a hump on their shoulder, and grizzly bears do. Now, some books say it in different ways. Some books will say that on a black bear, the rump is higher than the shoulder. And I have to tell you, no matter what posture the bear is in, you're going to get a little bit of a different view. This is a bear in the wild. This was North Carolina again back in June. And I think this just shows a perfect picture with the black bear. You can see that gently sloped forehead. You can see the lack of a hump on the back there. I'm not going to go into a lot of natural history. You got that in your textbook, but I did want to point this out to you. So black bears used to be all throughout North America. The coldest of the cold would be no black bear. The driest of the dry, the desert, would be no black bear. But pretty much everywhere else in North America, we had black bears. Look at what their current distribution is. It looks like it's moth-eaten, right? It's terrible. Well, I can tell you that if I had a third map here in the middle that showed you 1900, what the bears were like 120 years ago, you would see less white than today. So even though there's a huge difference between these two, we are moving in what I would think of as the right direction because the white patches are getting bigger and bigger. The only population of bears that's declining in North America is down here in the southeast. Did you even know that there's bears in Florida? Well, it's no surprise that the Florida bear population is on the decline because those are the bears that are living in the same places that retirees want to go to for their golden years. So in Florida, you've got a lot of lowlands with a lot of water, and so you got to build on the higher, drier places, and that's where the bears want to be as well. So it's not a mystery why we have a bear population that's in trouble there. And quite frankly, that's somewhat of the issue in other places as well, whether it's destruction of habitat or just bisecting habitat with roads. You end up losing bears because of human activity for the most part. Here in New York State, it's been a fantastic story since I started in FLCC. Now, it turns out my very first year at FLCC was 1995, and that corresponds with the beginning of the modern black bear story here in New York State. So look at this green hash mark here. This is where the bear population was in 1995. Think about how old you were in 1995, if you were even alive in 1995. So New York had three populations then of bears. We had an Adirondack population, we had a Catskill population, and the southern tier, which they call the Allegheny Range. By 2007, we ended up with two populations of bears, northern bears and southern bears. And today, these bears even have some mixing, so New York is becoming more and more populated with bears. What's interesting for my professional career is that Canandaigua sits right about there. Gosh, I don't know why the computer does that every once in a while. So here's Canandaigua, and then we own two field stations, and both of the field stations that we own are right here in the blue as well. Imagine that I was teaching at a community college, I don't know, over here. How less interesting this bear story would be to me because I wouldn't have as many opportunities as I do because of where I'm located. Here's what the bear map looks like today for New York State. This is what the DEC publishes. And instead of saying there's places where there are no bears, they say the brown is primary bear habitat. The orange or yellowish color is the secondary bear habitat. And then the tan is places where bears infrequently visit. I'll give you just a hint to some of the DEC's management goals for the state. The orange here in the Catskills is an area where they're currently trying to reduce the population. The green is where they want to maintain the population where it is at a moderate level. This color, whatever you're going to call this color here, is where they want to maintain the population at low densities. And then these are places in the middle of the state here where bears are very low frequency or even not a resident population, and that's how they want to keep it. It's possible that having more bears would mean you would have more problems. It just seems likely, in fact. So as we started to increase the number of bears here in our part of the state, we ended up increasing some of the problems. So this photo here on the left is one I took from a news story. This was a bear that showed up on campus at RIT, just south of Rochester. They've had another one on their campus since this one, and that bear had to be relocated. So maybe you notice there's a dart in it there. The DEC understands that Monroe County has zero habitat for black bears, and if they just let this bear go about its business, it was just going to get itself in trouble, probably get hit by a car. So they were going to relocate it to High Tour down in Naples state land where there's already a population of bears. They're not trying to stock bears, they're just trying to keep this bear out of trouble. So there's a live bear inside of this trailer here. It's sedated though. It's chemically immobilized. This is Jeb McConnell. He's one of my graduates. He's on the Black Bear team for New York State. Art Kirsch is the biologist here. He has since retired, and they're driving that bear into the garage at our East Hill campus. I was able to bring my entire black bear management class down that day. I jumped up on top of the trailer to take a few pictures here as they process the bear. So the bear continues to be chemically immobilized here. Jeb is fitting it with a radio collar so that they can track its movements, and they did release it into High Tour. I will tell you the rest of the story though. About a month later, 30 miles away from where they released it, the bear was hit by a car and killed. So often the end of the story isn't something that you hear or even have a chance to know about. But they did their best to try to keep the bear out of trouble. But the problem is they brought it to a place, and the bear didn't necessarily think that that was its home. It was looking for a place to live, and didn't find one before it was killed. Let's take a look at how to identify some bear sign. And you should, of course, realize that it would be much easier to find bear sign than it would be to find the bears themselves. So I want to focus on these four things right here, and we'll start with their tracks. Bears are plantigrade. So you can see on this bear track up here, it shows the whole heel. Bears have 5 toes per foot. That's the front and the back. And all I did when I found these bear tracks is I just put my sneaker in the wet grass so I could leave a footprint here next to it for scale. So that's my size 12 sneaker there. You can see that bear tracks are fairly large. Here's another picture of a bear track. Did you know that there's bears in Texas? So in the Guadalupe Mountains that border the U.S. and Mexico, they estimate about 20 bears for their entire population. And my daughter spotted one when we were down there. We also found some fresh tracks. This is a hind foot. I can tell it's a hind because it shows that full heel there. Whoops, sorry about that. And look at this divot right here. That's the arch, just like your arch. So this is a right foot because the arch would be on the inside. So I hope that picture makes sense to you there. I wouldn't ever ask you to tell rights from lefts or fronts from rears, but I do find it interesting and easy to tell once you put some effort into it. Bear scat. The best way to describe bear scat is if you find scat and you immediately start looking to see if there's toilet paper or half a t-shirt laying around next to it, that's bear scat. It can look very human-like, right? And sometimes it's more of a cow pie sort of thing, depending on what they eat. But look at the volume of this. Look how much there is there, and then look at the diameter of it. And by the way, black bears are true omnivores. Here's a black bear skull from our collection. You see the stabbers in the front, and then the grinders in the back. But it's not an omnivore where it eats 50% meat, 50% plants. In New York State, they've done studies, Cornell and ESF both, and they estimate, gosh, why does it do that? About 90% of a bear's diet in New York State is plant material. So here's a bear in Yellowstone. Notice that it had been eating vegetation. It's not walking around with an elk leg in its mouth. It's walking around with vegetation still stuck in its teeth. Is this a black bear or is this a grizzly bear? In Yellowstone, it could be either. Well, it's a black bear because gently sloped forehead, short claws, and oh, but that does look like a hump, doesn't it? Well, yeah, any animal that's going to drop its neck down this far is going to look like it has a hump there. So just be careful when you learn these things to not take them as absolutes, right? You got to take into account the animal's uh, behavior as well. If you look at this scat, you should be able to see lots of seeds in the middle here, kind of reddish. This guy had been eating raspberries, and I found it right on the edge of this cornfield. This was in New Jersey. I was at a wildlife refuge, and they literally planted the corn for wildlife. It wasn't meant to be harvested. Guys, look, I've discovered who makes crop circles. It's not aliens, it's black bears. I once talked to a farmer in Allegheny County. We were on our way to a bear den, and we were standing in the driveway. We were waiting for the landowner to show up, and the neighbor came over, and he was saying, he said if the bears just came into my cornfield and took what they needed, that would be fine. But they'll grab an ear of corn and they'll sit down and they'll knock over 10 stalks. Then they'll move a little bit, grab another ear of corn, and knock down 10 more stalks. And you know how corn is harvested with those big machines with that comb in the front of it. It's not like people are out there picking ears of corn. Anything that's laying on the ground doesn't get harvested. And so this guy had seen the negative side of black bear range expansion. Sometimes bears will climb trees in search of food. This is a beech tree. Maybe you recognize the smooth gray bark here. This was up in the Adirondacks. And you can see some claw marks here. I'd like to point them out. And then, of course, the big ones here that are nice and obvious. So sometimes as they're climbing, they'll slip, and that's what you see here. You see these claw marks. This was not claw marks that were intended to be marking the tree for some sort of territorial behavior. It's simply the bear climbing the tree to get at the beech nuts before all the squirrels eat them. And my question for you would be, why are these claw marks so wide? If bear claws are thin enough to make scratches like this up here, what caused these to be so wide? Well, the short answer is they're much older than these claw marks. And as the tree gets wider, the claw marks get wider as well. You're seeing stretch marks. These claw marks are a part of a marking behavior. This is in Florida, and I've never seen a bear in Florida, but I have seen fresh bear marks in Florida. This is a cedar tree, and you can see some of the claw marks up here, and you can see another set here. I've got one of my students, Alex, trying to line up his fingers with the claw marks. And these are meant to be slashing at the tree, and it's maybe some of it is visible. Maybe some of the mark here is visual, is what I'm trying to say. It's supposed to show up to another bear. But what most biologists believe is that they scratch trees and bite trees and then rub on the trees at the same time. So it's more of a scent mark, if you will. And imagine what scratching the tree will do. Part of it would be, let's say I'm rubbing on the tree and I grab onto it with my claws. I'm going to leave some scratches behind. But purposely scratching the tree will also mean that I will rough up the bark, and when I rub my fur against it, more of it will get caught in there, and therefore more of my scent will as well. Here's a bear in North Carolina that's actually doing the biting thing first here. So you can see this is that big bruiser that I showed you a picture of early on. And he's biting, standing on his hind legs and biting, and he's grabbing the tree with both of his front feet. So he's probably leaving scratch marks on the other side. And when he was done biting, he turned around and scratched and scratched. Is it possible he had an itch? Sure. But what this really is about them leaving scent behind instead of what Mowgli taught us. Baloo, I guess, was who taught us that in Jungle Book, that it was just about scratching. Here's some bear marks from Massachusetts. These are much smaller trees, so when the bear bit into these, wow, he really destroyed them. But you can tell that this is a bear bite. I'm going to circle this right here and then erase the red so you have a chance to see what I mean. You can see the point of entry for the canine, so they'll grab the tree and then pull away from it, and that's what leaves all that bark hanging like that and exposed. I love this picture. So you can see that it's two pictures blended together here. I made no attempt to try to hide this. I'm not trying to change the exposure on these, but this is a camera trap that I have on my dad's property down in Steuben County, and we found actually the bite on the tree from this bear. So I was excited to pull the SD card and did find the black bear there. Well, in the process, I had gone up and checked out the tree, so I was able to splice these two pictures together, and you can see that that bear is a little bit taller than I am, probably a lot taller if he stood up straight. So I did not rub on that tree as well. So in New York State, very few of our bears are anything but black. Best estimate that I can get from the DEC is less than 1%. So sometimes we'll get these brown black bears or rusty, what they call cinnamon black bears. And we even have a record of a single albino in New York State. But calling black bears in New York will rarely get you in trouble. The farther north you go and the farther west you go, that won't be the case. I forgot I had this picture in here. So I took this off the internet. This has been floating around for quite some time here. And sometimes it shows up and it's from Wisconsin. Sometimes it's from Tennessee. So I really have no idea where this picture is really from. But that would be a leucistic black bear. I took this picture in the Canadian Rockies where there are both black bears and grizzly bears. Which is this? Well, let's look at what we can see. So if we go from the ears down to the nose, you can see that there's a very gentle slope here, not a steep forehead. And especially when we look back here, we don't see any sort of a hump at all. I don't know why my pen is screwing up. And then same bear, have a look. There's that gentle slope forehead. And I promise you, if this was a grizzly bear, we'd be able to see some claws here. So this is a black bear that is not a black bear. I promise you on the final exam, I will give you a gray squirrel that's not gray, or a red fox that's not red, or a black bear that's not black, or a brown bear that's not brown. Do you know we have an entire class at FLCC for black bears? It's actually split into two smaller classes. So my Black Bear Management 1 class is in the fall. It's only 1 credit. And we learn all about black bears, learn all about their physiology and behavior. And then in Black Bear 2, we create a research project and hopefully get to go to a bear den with the DEC. So if you are interested in this class, you have to take Black Bear 1 in the fall in order to take Black Bear 2 in the spring. And you need to get a C- in this class that you're in right now. That's the prereq for this. So fantastic class. I've been teaching it for 10 years. Absolutely my favorite class. And some of the things that we do, you saw me working with a black bear cub there. We take measurements at the den to help answer a question what a typical bear den is like in New York State. The DEC does the work with the adult. This is the sow, and you can see she's been chemically immobilized, and she's already wearing a radio collar, and perhaps on this day that would be checked and maybe swapped out for one that's a little bit larger or has a fresher battery. And we measure the cubs. We take care of their health and safety during the den visit. We keep them in those little fleece bags to keep them warm, and we take some measurements to try to estimate when they were born. This particular den was one that was excavated by the female. So here the female's in the front here, but she's still under the drugs. And the cubs, of course, don't get mobilized. They're too small. So this is what it looked like inside of their den as we left them. This was a picture we just got 2 years ago from a more typical den. So let's focus on the den for a second, shall we? Most bear dens in the Finger Lakes are just big brush piles where the bear sort of brings in some material and makes sort of a nest for herself. And this bear tangled with a porcupine. So we had a camera trap set up. That's what this is taking here. And we actually got the porcupine / bear encounter recorded. It was interesting. I have a student this semester that is working on a presentation to do where she's looking at how many quills there were, how long it took for the quills to go away, and how often something like this might happen to bears. So I need to tell you that black bear attacks are pretty rare. Since 1960, so what are we talking about here, 60 years? We've only had 13 documented injuries to humans in New York State, and most of them are very minor. One of them was a small scratch to a sleeping camper. However, at the other end of the scale, there actually was a death in New York State. Uh, about 15 years ago, a mother left a baby unattended in a stroller, and a black bear came and bit the child in the stroller and killed it. I don't want to go into too many details of this, but when they killed the bear and opened up its stomach, it was full of garbage. So that bear had been coming to the dumpster regularly, and everyone was excited to see the bear when it was close up. And the biologist who told me the story, who did the necropsy, said, you know, everybody's criticizing that woman because she left her child alone, but that entire community takes responsibility because they had a problem bear and they did nothing about it. That was our only recorded fatality in all of New York. And in 100 years, there's actually only been 3 deaths attributed to black bears in all of the Northeast. So black bears are not as dangerous as other species of bears. In addition, sometimes there are stories that you hear that you just can't believe. In 2018, a man in the Adirondacks claimed that he was attacked by a bear when in reality he was being reckless and crashed his own ATV. The reason for black bears not being as dangerous as grizzlies is a couple things, but the most important one for you to know is female black bears do not defend their cubs the way that grizzlies do. So black bears are good tree climbers. If there's a problem, a black bear is just going to shoo her cubs up a tree and she's going to take off herself. Grizzly bears evolved in the plains. There wasn't a chance to do this, so they have to be vigorous defenders. I am going to be turkey hunting in May. I am not one bit worried about being in the woods and afraid that I'm going to get between a black bear and her cubs. Like, I'm not going to do it on purpose, right? I try never to get between a mother and her cubs, even like in Walmart. But if I did, I would not expect to be attacked by the black bear. Usually attacks on people come when the bears are being fed. So this is in Virginia. This is a national park my wife and I went to, and these garbage cans look like mailboxes in the front. They have those big doors that you open and you can't reach inside of them. And you notice that the bottom of the can is cemented into the ground here. So these are bear-proof garbage cans. There's an expression that says a fed bear is a dead bear. And what they mean by that is as a bear gets less and less afraid of people, he's going to become more and more of a nuisance. And eventually someone is not going to be happy about that bear being close up. I took this picture, but we set it up. It was in captivity. Just like this one, I took this picture in captivity as well, and I wanted to take a picture to show what not to do. This was supposed to be a careless camper leaving a cooler out. Well, I think this might be my last picture. Here's a couple bear footprints on our dumpster at the Mueller Field Station. My finger's in the way, I apologize, but we actually have a lock on the dumpster, but the lid was plastic. So for years and years, we never had any problems with bears until we had a bear figure out that he could sit on the plastic lid and pop it in, and that's how he was able to get into our dumpster. So we fixed the dumpster, no longer have a bear issue there, but that was kind of interesting this spring. Let's pause here and I will give you another video on grizzly bears.